Here in Liverpool, in the stores of the World Museum, lie trays of artefacts excavated in the 18th century from Anglo-Saxon graves 300 miles away in the county of Kent. How they ended up here is a story about the earliest years of archaeology in Britain, and also about how the material evidence of our past was once undervalued by the custodians of culture. The village of Ash, 9 miles to the east of Canterbury in Kent. It's quite a big place, almost a town. This is Guilton, a hamlet less than a mile from the Church of St. Nicholas at the centre of the parish. Today, there is not much to it. But in the 18th century, some remarkable discoveries were made here by a man who can fairly be called a pioneer archaeologist, though archaeology then had yet to become the science it is today. Brian Fawcett was a clergyman living at Heppington, 10 miles to the west of Guilton, but he was also passionately keen on genealogy, church inscriptions, and coin collecting.
They were a section of the population that had a formal education in a way that many other people, even quite well-off people, hadn't. So they could read and write. But they were also out in the countryside. They were also caring for a parish, visiting people. And so they were seeing lots of things on the ground. They were interacting with the local community. They were seeing discoveries.
One autumn day in 1759, Fawcett travelled to Ash to study heraldic inscriptions in the church. While he was there, he asked whether any antiquities had been found in the neighbourhood, and was told about discoveries made in a sandpit at Guilton, then called Gilding Town. Fawcett kept meticulous notes.
It was very unusual at the time in the 18th century to record the precise position of each object and the way it was found in a burial. Most of the archaeologists would be interested in the idea of a treasure, a gold or an object of a high artistic value, and they would be almost sort of blind by that, and they would be less interested in stating what is the significance of each object to the dead person and to the family who buried their dead. Why did they choose the particular objects for its burial?
Fawcett excavated 106 graves at Ash on 4 different occasions over a 3-year period.
11th and 12th of April, 1760. 11. Grave as before, and about 3 feet deep. Bones nearly gone. Nothing but 2 small dice, made of either ivory or bone. They lay near the neck. 19. Grave full 4 foot deep. Remains of the skull. A little lower I found a round silver fibula subnectans, i.e. with its tongue at the underside of the plate. It is beautifully set with 7 garnets. It is also neatly wrought and gilded in the intervals between the garnets. June the 16th, 17th, 18th, 1760. 23. Grave near 4 foot deep. A very beautiful brass buckle, gilt, on the tongue of which is set a fine garnet. A shank, but without a buckle, with its gold vermiculated plate and studs at the corners. An oblong square piece of gilded brass, in which also, as in a frame, is set a golden plate, neatly corded and vermiculated with 3 little holes at each end, by which it has been fixed to something. A piece of gilded brass, which seems to have been fixed to the end of a strap in order to pass it the more easily through the buckle. 42. Near the place of the right breast, I found a most beautiful round fibula subnectans. The face of it is pure gold, very curiously wrought, and set with a great number of small garnets in zigzag order. It has also 4 round sockets and 6 square ones, out of which the stones, or whatever else was set in them, are lost. In the centre is set a round garnet, which has a hole in it, in which, I imagine, a smaller stone was set. Certainly a woman's grave. 48. A very large silver buckle, gilded and curiously chased and worked, and figured all over its front. It is of the sort of the fibulae subnectentes, having its tongue underneath. August the 8th, 9th and 10th, 1763. 83. Grave about 3 feet deep. 2 crooked pieces of iron, each about 6 inches long, held together by an iron chain, whose links, about ½ an inch long each, were of the shape here described. To one of these irons was riveted a copper coin of Nero. The coin has the head of Nero, laureated, on one side with this legend: Imp Nero Claudius Caesar Aug Germ. There can, I think, be no doubt but that this was the bit of a bridle, and a great curiosity. 94. Grave about 3 feet and a half deep. A mirror or speculum. It is of a mixed metal, flat and circular. It is very highly polished on one side. It is nearly 5 inches diameter and somewhat convex on the polished side. It is much injured by rust, but not so much but that one may plainly see one's face in it. I suppose it formerly had a handle to it, somewhat in the manner described by pricked lines on the opposite page, but it was found broken. The pieces, however, lay near it, so that I make no doubt but that it was broken by the labourer's spade, the edges being quite fresh, as if just broken. There was also, close to the broken pieces, a bit of swollen, disfigured iron, which might perhaps have been the handle. I esteem it as a very great curiosity. 41. A small gold coin of the Emperor Justinian. On one side is his head, very uncouthly done. He has a cross on his breast, and this legend, Justinius N. On the reverse is a winged victory, and this very unintelligible legend, at least to me, Tiuntit aum, Cono. I can for my own part make nothing else out of it but that it was struck at Constantinople. It is very fair, and weighs just 22 grains. Certainly a woman's grave.
His interpretation of what he was finding was hindered by the lack of knowledge at the time. In many ways, he was a pioneer. He was the first person to excavate in England a very large number of Anglo-Saxon graves. So there just wasn't the background of knowledge and research behind him to make sense of it. So he looked at these fabulous artefacts with their very high quality craftsmanship and obvious displays of wealth of the people who've been interred, and decided these must be of Roman date. They equated them in his mind with Roman Britain, which he regarded as being inherently more sophisticated than the Anglo-Saxon period that followed.
Fawcett went on to excavate other graves in Kent, over 770 in all. By the time he died in February 1776, Fawcett had built a remarkably impressive and important collection.
Unfortunately, he went to his deathbed believing that all these artefacts were Roman, or from the period of the Roman occupation of Britain. And it was only after his death that it was realised, initially because it was realised there were 6th century Byzantine coins in some of the graves, that these must therefore be graves of the 6th century or later.
For over 70 years, the collection remained in the hands of the Fawcett family, living at Heppington. Then, in 1853, the British Museum was offered the collection by his grandson's executors. After several meetings, the trustees declined the offer.
The then curator in the British Museum, who was responsible for deciding whether the museum should purchase these or not, was a specialist in ancient Greece, and in particular ancient Greek pottery. So he was a classicist. His focus was very much the Mediterranean world, the classical world, and he didn't feel that a set of artefacts, even including some really spectacular things from Anglo-Saxon Kent and the Dark Ages, was of sufficient merit or interest to him, I think, if we're honest, to merit the British Museum purchasing them. So I think it was a very personal and somewhat selfish and very, very short-sighted decision.
It wasn't a financial issue because their acquisition policy was about, their acquisition budget was about £3,000, so there was enough money to purchase. It's just they didn't deem it as important enough. I suppose their eyes were trained on classical antiquities and Greece, and they didn't really understand the importance of keeping the collection together and recording such important burials as part of their antiquities department.
At this point, Joseph Mayer, a Liverpool entrepreneur, stepped in and saved the day, buying Fawcett's finds in their entirety for £700.
He was a successful goldsmith and businessman, and indeed, because he was so well connected in the antiquarian world, and he knew Charles Rhodes-Smith, who was advising Fawcett's family about the collections, he was able to, from the beginning, to express an interest.
Fawcett's finds didn't disappear from view into the private collection of a wealthy man. He made them accessible to the general public at his Egyptian museum in Colquitt Street.
Joseph Mayer was always interested in keeping collections together and making sure they're not dispersed into different private homes. And he also was very interested in acquisitions that would remain in the public domain.
Joseph Mayer also paid to have Fawcett's notebooks published in 1856 as Inventorium Sepulcrale.
He invested quite significantly, not just in keeping the collection together, but publicising it and making sure people become aware and the collections become well known for the field of Anglo-Saxon archaeology.
The Liverpool Mercury commented on his generosity: a tradesman by choice, a gentleman by nature, a ripe scholar by study, a wealthy man by industry, and a modest philanthropist by instinct. In 1867, he passed his collections over to the city's museum, now the World Museum, Liverpool. And in 1957, the site of the burial ground in Ash was given ancient monument status.
The cemetery that Fawcett excavated at Guilton remains the premier archaeological site of the parish, but it's not the only thing we know about in Ash that relates to the Anglo-Saxons, and I think there's much more to be found in the parish. So there's a second cemetery called Cop Street to the north of Guilton. It's particularly interesting because some of the graves were described as having stone slabs, which is almost unheard of in this period. But frustratingly, we don't know precisely where the cemetery is. And so that would be a fantastic project to do with the local community. It's crying out for a community archaeology project if we can pull together the resources and the enthusiasm to do so. And I hope we can.